Hello, this is Andrea Hillman for the Christian Persecution Report. Today I have Rod Dreher with me. He is a senior editor for the American Conservative. He has written for the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, the LA Times. He has appeared on networks such as CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, just to name a few. And he is a best-selling author of The Benedict Option. And today I want to discuss his book, his newest book, Live Not by Lies, a Manual for Christian Dissidents. And as you can see, this is a very important read. And Rod, I am so grateful that you've joined me today so that we can discuss this.
Well, it's an honor and it's a pleasure, actually, because the more Christians awaken to the threat that faces us right now, the more time we have to prepare for it.
Yes, I noticed when I started reading the book, I took a peek in the front, because as I started reading it, it almost in some places felt like we were starting to speak of history almost, or that I was living in what you were talking about as future. And I looked in the front and it said that the book was published by Sentinel in September 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah, just a few months ago.
Yes, and it is already starting to feel like the things that you were talking about that are coming are actually in the last month or two have really,
Yeah.
or maybe even 3 months have really come to pass. Can you please give us an overview of your book and why you think it's important that we have this information now?
Sure. Well, the book started, the idea for the book came in 2015 when a stranger called me, a doctor who works for the Mayo Clinic. We had a mutual friend, and he said, "Sir, you're a journalist, and I feel like I need to tell a journalist what just happened." He told me that his elderly mother lives with him and his wife, and she was born in Czechoslovakia and spent 4 years in prison for her Christian faith back in the 1950s when she was a young woman. The communists put her in jail because she refused to stop going to her church group. Well, she ended up immigrating, and he was born here, and life went on. But she told him back in 2015, "Son, the things I see happening in America now remind me of what things were like in my own country when communism came to power." And it really unnerved this man because of what she had been through. And he said, "I feel like I need to tell somebody this." Well, it seemed a little extreme to me, but I began making inquiries whenever I would travel around the country in my work to conferences or to give speeches. If I would meet somebody who had grown up in the Soviet Union or one of the Soviet bloc countries, I would ask them, "Are you seeing things today that remind you of what you left behind?" Andrea, every single one of these people said yes. And what they're talking about is people being afraid to say what they really think, or to talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or, for fear of losing their jobs, or
Yes.
having a cancel mob come on them. In fact, what woke this elderly Czech woman up was the thing that happened back in Indiana in 2015. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a fight over the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in the state of Indiana.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
all the state of Indiana was doing was passing a state version of the federal act.
Yes.
That would just give religious believers an affirmative defense in court if they were sued for discrimination. It wouldn't guarantee that they would win, but it would even up the playing field.
Yes.
Well, as soon as that was passed by the state and signed by Governor Mike Pence, major corporations like Apple, Salesforce, Eli Lilly, and others came down like a ton of bricks on the state of Indiana and said, "If you don't repeal this bigoted law, this anti-LGBT law, there are going to be severe economic consequences." And the state backed down. Well, around that time, there was a little pizza parlor, an evangelical-owned pizza parlor in a small town in northwestern Indiana. A TV station went there and asked the evangelical owners, "Would you cater a gay wedding?" And they said, "Well, yeah, we sell to gay customers, but it's against our faith to cater a gay wedding." That report went viral. That pizza restaurant, Memories Pizza, had to shut down because people were calling for them to mobs to descend on the town and burn the pizza parlor down. This is what triggered the Czech woman, because she said this is exactly what they did in my communist homeland.
Wow.
So the point of the book then is I identified, once I became convinced that this was a real thing and that these people weren't
Right.
alarmists, that they were seeing something, they were the canaries in the coal mine.
Right.
I started investigating, well, what aspects of totalitarianism does what we're dealing with now share with the Soviet experience? Because it's not going to be Stalinism 2.0, but it's still totalitarianism.
Right.
And
Right.
also, the second half of the book is based on interviews I did with believers in Russia and in the former Soviet bloc
Yes.
countries, who went through and who suffered under persecution under communism. I went and talked to those who are still alive and asked them, what advice do you have to give to American Christians and Christians in the West about what's coming now? And that's the book.
Yes, and I definitely want to get into what they told you about what we should be doing now, because at the Christian persecution report, I mean, I think I've kind of battled a lot with the idea that people and even honestly Christians seem to hold dear that we're not in danger. A couple
It
things
can't happen here.
happen. Yeah, that couple things happen here and there. Don't blow it out of proportion. But anyone who goes to my Facebook page and scrolls through the last 19, 20 months that I've been posting pretty much on a daily basis, I find whether it's a relatively minor crime against a church or a Christian to right up to murder inside of a church, there is persecution happening if you go by what the definition of persecution is, which is to harass or anything like that, to make somebody feel oppressed or uncomfortable, that they can't speak their mind. And that is the definition of totalitarianism, I believe.
Well,
uh,
totalitarianism, believe it or not, the word was invented by Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator in the early 20th century. He said that a totalitarian state is one in which everything is political, everything belongs to the state.
yes.
And
Hmm.
he came at it from the right, but of course, the communist left did the same thing too. And
Right.
some people say to me, you're calling what's coming here totalitarianism. That can't be true. We're not going to have the KGB come into our doors or gulags. And I think they're right. I mean, it may happen one day, but I don't think it necessarily has to happen to be totalitarianism. All they have to do is make it to where you can't get a job, you can't go out on the
Right.
street without being harassed. Your
Right.
church is protested,
Hmm.
you're marginalized for your faith or your political convictions, and there's no such thing as privacy. I saw
Right.
just this week, Andrea, there's some left-wing group started something called the Trump Voter Project, something like that, where what they're trying to do is get the names of everyone who voted for Trump, everyone they can prove voted for Trump, and make them public so nobody will hire these people. Now, I don't care if you voted for Biden, Trump, or whoever. That's wrong. That is un-American. But this is what's happening. And the thing is, the mentality in this country is such that you may never know why you never got that call for a call back for a job. You know,
Exactly.
and
Hmm.
but I've worked in newspapers for most of my life, and I'm an out conservative Christian,
Hmm.
political conservative, religious
Right.
conservative, and
Right.
but I can tell you that the sense of anger and spite towards people like me within the mainstream media was strong when I was working in newsrooms. Well, I've been out of newsrooms for 10 years now, working for a
Right.
magazine from home. And they have a whole new generation of young people who've come in there. These are the people who are now basically running the New York Times, because the older people who run the Times, as well as the older baby boomers and maybe older Generation X folks who are running universities, they're
Right.
terrified of this militant young crowd, and
Right.
they can cancel people. They can get your career smashed. And we're
Mhm.
coming to a time when, if you are affiliated with a church that they decide is an evil church, it's going to cost us, it's going to cost you your job, it's going to cost you status. And we have to be prepared to
Mhm.
not only stand firm no matter what it costs us, but also to help others in our community, other Christians who are made to suffer even when we ourselves aren't.
Right. Oh, that is such a good and timely word. I thank you for that. Um, if you don't mind, I would like for you to talk a little bit about how the social credit score system in China could, and also how I suspect that the Federal Reserve and other like agencies around the world are trying to move us toward a digital currency. And obviously, they can tell everything you're doing if there's a centralized digital currency. So, if you could explain how it's all working together in China and how that could spread not only to America but to around the entire world.
You
What
know,
does that look? How does it look like for Christians in China right now, do you think?
it's interesting you asked that question. One reason I chose to focus only on the Soviet example is because it was possible for me to go to those former Soviet countries and interview people.
Right.
I couldn't go to China and interview people today about what they're living with right now.
Right.
I think that that part of the story is as yet untold and needs to
Hmm.
be told. Because what's happening in China today is a preview for what I think is likely to happen here in the US.
Yes.
In China, they have proven that you can have a rich, modern, capitalist society
Hmm.
and still have no freedoms, no personal freedoms.
Absolutely.
And what they've done in China, they've gone very far to embrace a cashless society there. Most
Mhm.
transactions in China are done with your smartphone or online with your laptop. I mean, a friend of mine went to China and said you even have to buy toilet paper when you go into a public restroom. You have to use your smartphone to buy toilet paper, use a certain app. And they call this convenience, but what it really does, as you said, it allows the state to monitor every single transaction you make. The state also monitors everywhere you go online. It monitors everywhere you go you walk around the city because it tracks your GPS on your smartphone. And almost everybody in China has smartphones.
Right.
The state also has uh, uh, closed circuit television cameras with facial recognition software attached to it, so they can know who's walking down the street at any particular time. Well, all of this information, to only slightly oversimplify, all of this information goes into a central database. So each Chinese citizen has their own profile. It's constantly updated, profile within the computer. It's constantly updated to reflect where they've been, who they've hung out with, what they've bought, and so on and so forth. If you're the kind of person who is a good conformist, the Communist Party thinks that you're a model citizen, you've downloaded the speeches of Xi Jinping, and you only hang out with good patriots, well, you'll get a high social credit score. That opens the door for you to go to the best restaurants, the best shopping. You could travel widely. Your kids can go to the best colleges. But if you're the kind of person who hangs out with people who question the government, if you go to church, if you've been spotted or your GPS coordinates say that you've entered a church, it's all recorded. And you'll get a lower social credit score. And you'll find that you can't get the best jobs. Your kids can't go to college and so on and so forth. If you get a low enough score, you can't buy or sell. Now, when I was a child back in the 70s and the early 80s, I remember reading The Late Great Planet Earth and about the
Yes.
mark of the beast, and
Yes.
you weren't able to buy or sell. That's in the Bible. And I always wondered, how did that happen? Well, guess
Mhm.
what? This is how it's happening. It's happening in China right
Right.
now. And right now in the United States, the government doesn't collect all this information, but major corporations do. And it is available on the open market. There was a story last year about how one of the federal law enforcement agencies bought some data that a corporation had captured, the same kind of data, and used it to arrest people. Um, they're not doing this, collecting this information from us secretly. They're doing it completely legally and out in the open. We just, ordinary people like you and me, we don't even think about it. We get an app on our phone, you just click through and you put it on there. But all that data are being collected and stored. And it's possible, and I think likely that it will be used against us someday in ways that we may not even know.
Yes. I can't remember where, but recently I think it was Ben Shapiro. I heard him say something about everything you've ever put on social media, delete it, get rid of it, because they're going to use it to come back
No,
and
it's
haunt you with it.
really
So
true. I sat in an apartment in Prague, in the capital of the Czech Republic, talking to an older woman, Kamila Bendova. She and her late husband had been key leaders, Christian leaders in the anti-communist underground in Prague. And she told me that she and her adult children, none of them will use smartphones today, and they try to stay off the internet as much as possible. I said, why? She said, because we learn from our experience
right,
that any information that others have, that entities, whether it's the state or major corporations, what they have, that can and will be used against you one day. And
right.
she said, people are absolute fools to think that it won't be. And I'm sitting there, she's saying that, and I've got my smartphone there. I'm recording what she's saying, but
Right.
I'm implicit or implicated in this too,
Yeah.
because we have to live and work. But I
Right.
talked recently to a man who had read my book, a retired military intelligence officer, and he said, I can't tell you everything because I'd violate my oath, but I'm telling you the things that you're saying in there in Live Not by Lies about how the government is collecting all electronic information, it really is true. It's not
Yes.
fake. It's not conspiracy theory. And
Right.
we can't totally avoid that and live in a normal life, but we do have
Right.
to prepare ourselves for the time when, let's say that we saw what happened on January 6th in Washington. Well, they're starting to call some of us, whether or not we voted for Trump, but if we're conservative and Christian, they're calling us domestic terrorists.
I
What
have seen that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
disturbing.
right. So you remember the aftermath of 9/11. I was
Yes.
living in New York then, working for the New York
Oh,
Post, and I saw the South
wow.
Tower come down with my own eyes. Remember how we all felt about Muslims back then? And I remember there was a lot of people saying we've got to, they've got to infiltrate the mosque and things. And I'm like, of course we do. We have to do that to protect our country.
Mhm.
So what happens when people start thinking about that, about Christians in the same way?
Right.
What happens when the media starts whipping up paranoia about ordinary Christians, Southern Baptists, Catholics, whoever,
Which they're
saying,
doing.
of
Yeah,
course.
they
And
already are.
so this is one of the reasons in Live Not by Lies, I say that we have to start right now preparing for the day when this is going to
Mhm.
turn really hard-edged. I dedicate
Mhm.
the book to a man named Father Tomislav Kolakovich.
Yes,
He was
yes.
a Catholic priest. I'm not a Catholic myself, but this man was a hero for all Christians. In 1943, he was living in Croatia, his homeland, and doing some work against the Nazis. He found out the Gestapo was coming for him, so he escaped and went to Slovakia, his mother's homeland, and adopted her last name, Kolakovich, to hide out. He began teaching in a Catholic university there in the capital city, and he told his students, he said, good news, the Germans are going to lose this war. The bad news is the Soviets are going to be ruling over this country. And the first thing the communists are going to do is come after the churches and Christians. We've got to get ready for it. So what he did, he would organize small groups for prayer, but not only for prayer, but also for contemplation, to talk about what was happening in their society, and then to decide how they could act to prepare themselves and build the networks for mutual support when the Iron Curtain came down. Within 2 years, Father Kolakovich had spread these prayer groups, a network of prayer groups all over Slovakia. The bishops, his bishops of his church said, oh, you're being paranoid, you're being alarmist, it will never happen here. But he didn't listen to them because he had studied the mind of the Soviets and he knew how they were going to work.
Right.
Sure enough, 1948, the Iron Curtain comes down in that country. They expelled Kolakovich and they immediately shut down churches and they imprisoned priests. The reason the underground church survived there is because Father Kolakovich and lay Christians and also some priests who woke up and knew that he was serious, they laid the groundwork and the network to prepare to keep the church alive under persecution. I believe, Andrea, that we are in a Kolakovich moment right now in America, and that we in the church, whether we're Protestant, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, whatever we are, we have got to take this seriously and start laying the groundwork for mutual support so the spreading of the gospel and the worship of Christ can stay
Mhm.
alive no matter what.
Wow, that is, there's so much truth in that. And I really don't understand when if someone says that they don't see it. I mean, to me it is so clear. I think one of the concerns I have, when you read the Bible, it talks about how families will be split, like mother against daughter and father against son and all this. And I remember reading the part in your book about the Chinese system and how even if let's say they came after you and gave you a poor score, how it would also affect the social score of everyone else around you,
That's right.
who is associated with you, and certainly those who live in your own home.
That's right.
And that really struck a chord with me on how families, especially because there's so much division right now, I think, between the older and younger generations, that I could really see how these kind of things could cause a huge rift amongst families.
That's right. And your family, your own children would not be able to come see you if they wanted to keep their job, keep their social
Right.
credit score high. And but there's also things that are happening in this country right now. The rift you're talking about, where it's coming along politics. There was a girl, like 18, 19-year-old teenager, out I think in Washington State, who outed her mother and her uncle for going to the January 6th rally. These people did not go into the Capitol; they were just there. Well, she's very liberal, and she put on social media, "My mother, my uncle were there." Her mother lost
Wow.
her job, and she found all the young woman found all this these cheers, all this so-called pseudo community online saying, "Good for you, you're taking a stand for righteousness." And this is the kind of thing that happened in the communist countries. Kids were told by their schools that if you want to be a patriot, then you need to turn your parents in if they say things against the government. I
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I talked just this week to some senior leaders of an American church, who I'm not going to say who they were, but they had we had a private Zoom meeting, and
Mhm.
they said that even in their conservative churches, in their youth groups, when they start to talk about what the Bible says about sexuality, and when transgenderism comes up, they have kids who are standing up and walking out, people from their own church, because they've been taught in school that when you hear somebody speak this way, get up and walk out. And
Wow.
these are kids who've been raised in this conservative church.
It seems that science only matters nowadays when it fits the narrative, unfortunately.
Well,
Um,
politics has gone into family relationships. This is totalitarianism when it politics affects everything.
right.
Just this week on Monday, I wrote a letter to the editor of my local paper here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana,
Mhm.
praising my friend Senator Bill Cassidy. I like the fact I'm a conservative, but I like the fact that he voted for Trump impeachment. I have a lot of friends who are pro-Trump. They disagree with him, but he's getting beat up pretty bad. And I said in my letter, I'm proud of him. I like a lot of what President Trump did, but he crossed the line on this day. I got an email that morning, I'm sorry, a text from a friend who I've been friends with for 40 years. She's a former teacher of mine. Andrea, she said, we can't be friends anymore. I said, but why? Because she's super liberal. The fact that I said that President Trump did some good things was enough for her to conclude that I'm evil. And after 40 years of being friends, we can't be friends anymore. This is how crazy things have gotten. And I've heard similar things from people on the right. You know, people and cutting off members of their family because they're not,
Yeah.
pro-Trump enough or whatever. I'm like, no, our brother, the bonds of family are much more sacred than politics, and the bonds of faith should be too. But that's not how
Right.
things are in this country.
No, it's not. It really isn't. I heard a short phrase, or no, excuse me, I didn't hear it. I read it the other day, and it was very clever. And I wish I could remember the person who had written it, because I thought it was fabulous. But they they were talking about focus on the family being kicked off of Twitter.
Mhm.
And he termed it as them being thrown into a digital gulag. what do you think that that is an accurate representation? I thought it was really powerful
Yeah.
that, this, and is that what social media is technically doing? Because it seems like social media is so necessary today to build business and connections and everything. So it is kind of a gulag, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. It is. My friend Ryan Anderson, he's the new president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a think tank in Washington. He wrote a really good book a couple of years ago called When Harry Became Sally, and it's about transgenderism. And Ryan's book talks about transgenderism from the point of view of medicine, of law, and so on. He talks about how this ideology that's coming along with it threatens religious liberty, but also threatens children.
Right.
You can disagree with what Ryan had to say, but he got some good reviews from medical authorities who said this stuff is important. Ryan is not
Mhm.
a flaming crazy person, but he's a
Right.
respected public policy analyst.
Right.
Amazon refuses to sell his book now. He wrote about this earlier this week.
Right.
Someone tried to buy the book. They said Amazon won't sell it. Amazon didn't tell him they were delisting it. The book had been a bestseller, and they won't give his publisher any explanation for this. Now, why is this important? You can still buy Ryan Anderson's book from Barnes and Noble and other places. It's important because, as somebody who writes books for a living, Amazon controls so much of the book market that if they
Right.
refuse to carry books on a certain theme or that take a certain approach, like being critical of transgender, then publishers can't afford to take a chance on it. So,
Right.
so you can say, well, Ryan can sell his book elsewhere. That's not the point. The point is
Mm-mm.
Amazon is so powerful digitally that they send books that are critical of transgenderism to the digital gulag. And
Goodness.
so this is, and look, this is all happening. It's perfectly legal. There's no law in this country that says a bookstore or a bookseller has to sell certain things. But you know what? If you go on Amazon, you can buy a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf, but you can't
I
buy, yeah.
I'm sorry. I just find it very, yeah, it's a strong word. I kind of hate to use it because I don't want to be hyperbolic about it, but it strikes me as hypocritical to say that a private company must make a cake, like not one they've already made to sell to somebody, but that they must be compelled to use their artistic talents to create a cake for a homosexual couple who chooses to get married.
Mhm.
If they want to do that, that's fine, but why should I be compelled in my private business to go and do that when I hear on the left all the time that Facebook doesn't have to allow you to speak at all? They're a private corporation. Amazon doesn't have to sell your book. They're a private corporation. Why is one okay, do you think, and not the other?
Well, I think there are probably some legal technicalities that might explain some of that, but morally, you're exactly right. I mean, I was telling a friend, though, a Christian friend, about Ryan's book. I said, we want to be careful because if there's a law that compels Amazon to sell Ryan's book, that same law would probably compel a Christian bookstore to sell the Satanic Bible. We don't want that.
No,
But
no.
but this just shows, though, how this is a unique problem that I don't know that we've ever had to deal with in our economy and society. When companies like Amazon and Facebook and Twitter, they become kind of like a public utility, and
Right, exactly,
they have a
exactly.
concentration of power. And we
Right.
have laws that can deal with that, but we need our political leaders to get on top of that, because it is going to make it impossible for people who dissent to make a living.
Well, here's to hoping that they will. Rod, I want to give you a couple of minutes here as we're wrapping up our time together, because I could talk to you for 2 hours easily. But if there are any final thoughts that you would like to share with our audience today, things that they should be doing now, maybe contacting their representatives, or and how they might word their concerns and such, so that the silent majority is not so silent, maybe not beating down the Capitol building, but maybe we don't need to be silent either.
No. Here's one thing I worry about, though, Andrea. Are we the majority anymore? This is one thing
Good
that's
point.
really, really troubling. The Christianity in this country has been declining in terms of numbers since 1991. And
Right.
the Generation Z, those born after 1997, I think that's a cutoff point. They're the first generation in American history in which a majority of them will not be Christian. And
Wow.
it's shocking. So what we need to be
Right.
doing now is we can't allow ourselves to think that the only way to deal with this is through politics. We have to keep fighting politically, but if we put all our hope in politics, we're going to leave ourselves unguarded. What we need to be doing is deepening our own commitment to Scripture, our own knowledge of Scripture, building small groups where we can come together with people who get it, who are awakened
Yes.
to the threat, and talk about what are we going to do for each other if one of us loses our job, and we have to come out and defend each other when we are attacked. And we need to build these networks like Father Kolakovich. So it's a lot of this is in my book, but I want to say this too. This is one of the key points I learned. This is in chapter 9 of the book about suffering. Every single one of these Christians I talked to in the Soviet bloc said that Christians in America are so weak right now because you don't know how to suffer. You've
That's
had
true.
it's true. He said, you've
It
had it
is.
so easy for so long, the blessings of liberty. But as soon as somebody comes to you and says that you might have to lose your job unless you bow down before whatever false idol they have, or you're going to not be invited to the party, or your kids are going to be scorned,
Right.
etc., you'll give up because you had no experience suffering for Christ. And we have to start teaching in our families and in our churches, again, the value of suffering for Jesus. This is common in churches in much of the world today. The churches in the Islamic countries, the church in China, they're persecuted. They know what it means
Right.
to suffer for our Lord. If you look back in Christian history, this is the story of the church. We actually, in America now, at a time when we're not persecuted or haven't been persecuted, we are the anomaly in Christian history. So
Yeah.
there is a rich, rich literature of how the church has fared under persecution. Most recently, I mean, it's happening in China now, but I based the book on the church's experience under Soviet communism. And they told me too, Andrea, that they said you have to keep in mind that most people in these countries, most Christians even, did not protest, did not dissent. They just wanted to avoid trouble. So what they said, what you need to do is find the people now while you're in freedom who will have the courage to stand up and stand with you. Be
Yes.
friends with them. And they said too, this is something really interesting. um, Camilla Bendova, the Czech woman I was telling you,
Mhm.
as I said, she and her husband were the only Christians as part of the inner circle of dissidents. And she said, look, back in those days, it took so much courage to stand up to the government that if you found anybody who was willing to stand up, you had to be their friend. And they learned to trust you too. I'm seeing the same thing happen now. There's a woman, Barry Weiss, who is Jewish. She's center left. She's a lesbian. But she told me, she goes, Rod, if you had told me 2 years ago that I would become friends with Rod Dreher, I never would have believed it because I'm very conservative. But she and I see things together. We're trying to defend the same liberties that Americans have taken for granted. I've become friends with this.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. I want to
I've
see
become
both. Both sides should be able
exactly,
to speak and have their
exactly.
say.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
don't want her shut up. I don't agree with her,
No,
but she's
no.
an American and she's a
Yes.
neighbor and she's a good person. I don't agree with certain of her beliefs and her
Sure.
lifestyle, but come on. I've become friends with Brett Weinstein and his wife Heather Hying. They're both leftists,
Hmm.
university professors,
Hmm.
atheists, but they
Hmm.
got driven out of Evergreen State University by the woke mob because they wouldn't accept these lies that were demanded to have to do. And
Right.
they realize too, as I do, that we who are willing to stand up to it have got to unite and put what separates us aside. These things are important, but we have
Right.
to stand together. And I remember, and maybe we can end on this because I think this is a beautiful sentiment. one thing I learned from reading the diaries and the accounts of Christians who suffered in communist prisons is they said that whether you were Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox, all these things, differences mattered in the world. But when you got there behind prison, everybody knew that they weren't put in prison because they were Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox. They were put in prison because they stood up for Jesus Christ. And that brought them together in a bond of the good kind of ecumenism, and they learned to love each other and to help each other. I say we have to do this right now. I'm an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and I know why I'm an Orthodox Christian. I know these differences matter, but I will be happy and eager to come to the defense of my evangelical brothers and sisters, my Catholic brothers and sisters, because if they go down, if they suffer, it's going to happen to me too.
That's right.
Yeah, all of us Christians, whatever our denomination or our confession, we need to understand that when they come for one of us, they're going to come for all of us.
That's right. Exactly. That is a great final point. Rod, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been very instructive and enlightening, and I hope maybe sometime in the future that we can revisit this and see how this is continuing to play out.
Well, I'm happy to keep talking to you. And I think a lot of people are afraid to think about this and talk about this because they want to think it can't happen here. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the greatest Christian dissident of the 20th century, said this is the problem, that people around the world think what happened in Russia can't happen here. It could happen in any country in the world, he said, given the right circumstances. And I think that our optimism, our desire to just be hopeful and think things are going to work out, that is going to get us in trouble and maybe even get us killed one day. We need to be not optimistic, but hopeful. To be hopeful means that we hope things will work out, but we have to allow for the possibility that the Lord, for whatever reason, might have his church go through this time of purification. And if we are hopeful, Andrea, then we can bear whatever the enemies of Christ have to dish out on us, because we know ultimately that even if we suffer for the Lord, and even if we give our lives for the Lord, that God will win in the end, that God will use this for his glory.
We've read the end of the book, so we know, right? And we know which book we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Amen, sister.
Rod, thank you again so much. I appreciate your time. And thank you to the audience here. Thank you for joining us. What do you think about all this? You can reach out to me at Blue Ridge Christian News. You can reach out to me at the Christian Persecution Report on Facebook. And I'm going to be starting this up on YouTube as well. So let me know. Let me know what you would like to see in the future, who you may want to speak to about the things that are coming in the future. Thank you guys for being with me. You have a blessed day, and bye for now.